Today we're going to be looking at the cinematography breakdown of the Apple event that was shot exclusively on the iPhone 15 Pro Max. The point here is to see what we can learn from the camera work, lighting, or just the general shot concept. Let's go into it. So if we start with this drone shot, right, it's something I just really noticed as soon as we go in. Here at this point, the moment this stops, bam, and the camera just sort of zooms and dolly in, you already start to see that, okay, this might not necessarily be an actual camera and it might just be a phone. For me, that was a giveaway. But more interestingly is look at the levels on this thing. Look at the levels on this thing. What I first noticed is a lot of this fog and smoke thing. I do not think this is necessarily natural fog or smoke. I think this is just post-production work. And I believe that one of the reasons why this was done was to hide the shadow noise, was specifically to hide the shadow noise. So if once we start to go in, and there's a shot that I'm looking for specifically, is here, for example, right? We can see here that everywhere, look at this side of the frame, look at the shadow detail. It's still somewhere around 2. But look at this side where there's no fog, there's no smoke. We are gone in that regard. We are gone. So basically what I'm trying to say here is that the iPhone is something that needs a lot of light. And I think they did a great job to hide all the murkiness and all the whatever by just trying to, see what they can do as best as possible. Another frame is, look at this side. All of that information is gone. We can literally not see anything here. You see this rainbow thing, it's right here, which is great because we can see that there's information there. You see this here, which is here, that's information there. But everything to this right of the frame is gone. So just from the drone thing, honestly, I think it's okay, which is why I feel like they covered a lot of this with fog and smoke. And the point is just to be able to hide the noise or the murkiness of the shot. I think if you actually go back, right, there's a part of the shot where you actually start to see that, okay, right here, for example, not a lot of people are going to be able to make out that these are actually trees because the information is not really there. And that's why this has been hidden by using the fog and the smoke. Let's go to another shot that I'm really interested in here is when Tim comes out. This is a classic shot for a lot of reasons. One, just looking at the waveform, right? There are a couple of things to note here. They shot this during Halloween, so they wanted to keep this all contrasty and dark colors, not too many bright colors. And you can see that in this shot. If you look at where his skin is, it's somewhere just touching 50, just touching 50. So the levels are not necessarily as bright, not that commercial look. For someone like Tim, you'd expect that perhaps this should be around 55 ish, but we're just barely scraping 50. So, which is okay. It's the good levels, but they're not bright levels. They're more like contrasty or like, dramatic levels. In that regard, I thought that was interesting to know that, seeing how those levels just do not go past 50 in this case. Also, another thing to note is look at the shadows here. Nothing is going below 2. I put this point here just to guide that. I'd say, yeah, nothing is going below 2, which automatically tells you that there's baseline everywhere. And if you don't know what a baseline is the minimum amount of light that is being put into a scene to illuminate everywhere. So here, all of these places here are possibly receiving some sort of baseline, which is why we have those information in those places. Let's go into the camera work, for example, and I'm going to use something else to just, emphasize on that, right? So if we come here, let's take this frame, for example. I think that just from a camera perspective, and if you look at the BTS, you will see this there. This is probably a 24, judging by how wide this frame is. This is an extreme wide. I would say this has been shot on the 24. And that sort of makes sense because the 24 is also the one that will do best in low light. So it just sort of makes sense. Another thing to instantly note in terms of just the camera work is how everything is in focus. And this is not surprising because one, they stuck to the native lens on the iPhone. So that means that this sensor is a small sensor. It's not going to have a bokeh. This is just basically due to the camera sensor, the lens, the native lens on the iPhone, and the composition that they've used. All right, let's go into composition wise. I like a lot of the things that they've done here. This is just standard. You have a lot of leading lines. You have this, you have this. All of these things here, you can see that everything is leading into the subject, even the lights. You know, the idea here is that we are pointing down into a source, which makes sense as to why they would place him here, because everything leads into this. Even if you look at the floor, you see all of these lines, they're all going in, and just, you know, getting to that space. So here and here as well, everything just leads into this particular point, which makes a lot of sense if you want someone to stand out as the main focal point. If you are probably doing a presentation and you want to highlight a particular character, you want them to stand out the best or to stand out most, center framing is a good way to approach this, and use leading lines. Let's go into the lighting side of things. This is where this gets really interesting, considering this is a smartphone. For this shot, because of the levels on the face, I would assume that the light is here, and that is, you know, shining on him here. I believe they had two panels on this side, just, you know, giving that levels, and then they have some other panels here as well that is acting as that feel. What is interesting to note is if you look at this side of his face, the levels here are brighter than the levels here, which automatically just instantly tells you that this side is the key side and this is the feel side. And you can see that as well by the shadow here. The light is coming from here, and the shadow is projecting that way. Another thing that we can see, or that we can sort of just notice straight away, is that there's no hair light. Let's bring this into the medium shot here. There's also not a lot of backlight to separate him from the background, which is where I think they've done a good job by placing him here. They use this color contrast, this backlight here, to separate him from the background. You see how the lighting here is more daylight, and this is now starting to go into like the, you know, warm, somewhat daylight, warm, which I think it's an interesting light concept. By using those contrasting daylight and warm colors, they're able to get a difference in the background. Another thing to note as well is if you look at this light in the video, they do not flicker, which tells me one thing: these lights are not just household lights. They were installed because they weren't flickering. Well, it's either that or, you know, they dialed in a variable shutter, which you know, might work, but I would assume that these lights here are dialed in. Actually, I think they're pre-installed because as well, they're not blown out. I think regular house lights should have been blown out just because they need to be able to control those levels. I strongly think that these panels here were installed. This might just be an aperture, what's that aperture thing called? Right, it might just be one of those aperture LED strips that are installed here or something. Overall, there's no deep dark, maybe besides the tree here, but you know, we don't really need information there. We can see the information here on the wall. You can see the things on the staircase. So there's really no deep dark spots here, and this is relatively more easier than that of the second one that we're going to look at because this is a night shoot. There's not a lot of movement and the lights are not moving. You don't have to Hollywood any lights. Everything is just static there. If you look at the wardrobe as well, look at what he's wearing. And this is interesting because they all actually follow the same color palette. So he's wearing blue jeans, black shoes, a jacket, and there's that accent here of the Apple Watch. Why? I don't know, but it's just interesting to see that they also use that, black and deep blue costume to just match the aesthetics of what they're doing. Overall, I think that is a great thing to consider when you start to look at the cinematography of this thing, the amount of information and effort that just goes into planning this types of shot. So costume makes a lot of sense. Lighting wise, it's not really complicated. It's just, to set up, you have a key light and you have a field light, and then they complement that whole scene by using warm and daylight balance lights at the background to be able to separate him from the background. So he just doesn't blend into the background into the darkness. They use the base light that is just bringing up all the levels in this place. Whether that is a overhead, possibly could just be like like one overhead here that's just like firing down on all of these places to bring up the levels on all of this side. And then you have the key and you have the fill here. So pretty standard work, good, considering this was shot on an iPhone. I think it's passable. Let's go to the second one that is a more complex shot, and that is this guy here, right? This guy here. Once again, leading lines. You can see that on the table here, leading lines. You can see all of this lines, all of these things just guide your eyes into looking at where the talent is, the subject is. So you can see that all of these things have been placed, and they just sort of create visual elements that drive your eyes to look at the character or the person in the shot. But aside that, I think this is also 24 that's been used here once again to get the best quality and all of that. It's also on a crane, and like the previous shot, there's no shallow depth of field because of the camera sensor. But what is interesting here is the light. Now, this is a much more complex setup than that was used for Tim. I think that there is this is definitely this is some top lighting going on here, and you can see that on the things on his head here. You can see the levels there. Let me find a better representation here. I think if we bring this into the shot, you can see what I mean here. I strongly think that all of this here, this huge box here, is just a giant grid that's been installed. There's light just pouring down on all of this place. So when he moves in the frame, you get to see all of that. Even when the camera just, dollies in, you see what is going on there. So here it's mostly top lighting for the frame here. And once again, they actually do something really interesting with the backlight. Okay, if we come back to this shot here, you can see what is going on here. There is this light here, there's a fixture here, there's another fixture here, there's a fixture here, there's a fixture here, and you can just sort of start to see how they planned this shot. There's something here, there's a reflection going on here. My guess is it's coming from here, because that reflection is not here. You can see that the levels here, they've been raised up so that this sort of starts to separate him from the background, right? The moment you see that, it sort of guides your eyes to be able to see all of those things. One giveaway how you will know that this is top lighting, look at this reflection here. This reflection is coming from the grid that is just pouring down in this side of the frame. So one key thing to note though is the difference in levels. The levels on this side is different from the levels of the grid that's acting as the key for him. Because you also want your subject to be the brightest in the frame. So you can see how the levels here are probably maybe anywhere from, I don't know, 20, 25, 30. But on him here, the character, if we go into Final Cut Pro, for example, we can really see what that is here. This is where Johnny is. He's still in that 50 to 55 range. So he's good, but look at the levels here on this side of the wall. You can see them here. They're anywhere from the 25 to about 40-ish while he's here. So you can start to see how this difference sort of comes into play when you are planning out a shot. There are a couple of things that I wanted to show here. The lighting starts to change the moment he starts to move, right? So if we come in on the close-up, we see more of how that light is just working. It's top lighting. You have almost equal shadows and everything. It does look like there is more shadow on this side of his face, but that could just be because the camera is moving to this angle. Actually, there is, because if you look at the neck, there's shadow here and there isn't here. So that tells us that when they moved in closer for the medium shot, they brought that light in closer, and you can sort of see that around here as well, where that is just projecting upon his face, which is great. But one thing I wanted to show is that the moment he starts to move, so here you can see that difference really clearly. All you have to do is watch. Remember when we saw the levels on the neck? Now look at when he starts to move. As soon as he starts to move, look here. Look at how flat or like evenly lit his face is. Now watch him. As soon as he starts to move, right? You start to see that bam. Here, first of all, look at this. There are shadows here now, which starts to tell you that at this point, that light is only coming from this grid and coming down on him. And then the more he moves, right? For example, let's say here, you still see that the only light source in this case now is from that grid. I think actually because this room is here, maybe when he was here, the light was just flying in from this point. And now that he's gone past, you can see that the levels have started to change, okay? Now, at this point, you start to see again, top lighting all still coming from this grid as he's moving from point A to point B. What is interesting here is when he gets to this point, look at this. The shadow has moved to the right side of his face, which tells me that now there's another light source somewhere here, right? So to just sort of emphasize that, if we look at this frame here, this is the frame, this is the second point here. You can see that the levels on this side, they're brighter than the levels on this side. So the moment he walked from there and came to this side of the frame, you see that those levels change. Interesting thing here that I just caught now, actually, the light that's coming from this grid that's bouncing all over the place. Look at this stool. You see that this side that the table is covered is darker than this side that isn't covered, which instantly tells you that that's light source is coming from that grid up top. But coming back to him, right, you see how that changes here. So I don't think they were able to move a lot of the lights around when they were filming this, which is why they just positioned the lights in places where they would be able to, get their levels in and out. He does something interesting at this point. He moves. And I think that this is where the most dramatic change sort of happens in terms of just the general light and cinematography of this. The moment he starts to move, I want to show you something really funky. This is where you really see the change in everything. Okay, so if we stop here, right? Is this the frame that I'm looking for? If we stop here, for example, we see that the light here is still on the right side of his face. The moment we get to this point, honestly, I don't understand why there's such a drastic change in the lighting here, because look at this side. What happened to the light here? All of a sudden we're missing that light. There's more shadow on this side of the face compared to this. It's funny because they just let this play for about 2 seconds and they cut back to something else, which is telling me that they sort of recognize that. And this perhaps is the most dramatic frame here, because you can clearly see that the light source is now here. it's no longer on the left side of frame. It's now here, which is, you know, overall is just really interesting to see how they made that choice. Why? Maybe because there's no space here or something, but even the top light seems not to be doing too much. I'm guessing he's gotten to the end of the grid, and the only light source they could have now was to place something on this side of frame. He does go in here. Now, when it comes to this side again, you see that the levels have changed here. There's more light on this side of his face. There's a fill light here. Now we're starting to look like there's some action, some hair light, just rim to separate him from the background here. And if I just sort of like go in like maybe 75%, let's see if we can see that. Right, so we see this here. We see this here. We see this here. This is a rim coming. Maybe that's from the grid. I'm not necessarily sure, but we see that there's an action here. Let's just look. Ooh, that is hot right there. You can see that literally on his forehead. But what gives this away is if you look at his eye light, you can see two lights here, which is funny. So here it tells me that there is a fill light on the left side of frame, and the key light is just off to the right, which is what you can see. That's why he has two bars, two reflections in there. So honestly, it's pretty standard cinematography. If we look at the way they used the lights here, they didn't mix a lot of lights, which makes sense because it's supposed to be a lab. It's supposed to be a lab. Here, I think there are some dark spots underneath the tables, but hey, once again, there's really not a lot that can be done about that. I think if we also just look at the general idea, the mood board around this, once again, wardrobe complements the look that they're going for. We have that black and deep blue thing going on. He's not wearing an orange watch, but you can see accents of just colors here and here and here and here. You know, so overall, that is the general cinematography of this thing. And I think what this just says is that if you want to film on an iPhone 15 Pro Max, lighting is everything. And hopefully you've been able to gain some understanding as to how Apple lit this scene and how you can apply that into your own videos as well. Take care. Bye. See you in the next one.